Hey guys, tonight we drift out together into one of those wide oceans that never seems to end. Imagine yourself stepping onto a sandy shore where the horizon looks like it's been stretched with no mercy, and the waves slap the beach in a rhythm older than memory. You tiptoe into a canoe that creaks softly, and you push off into black water. The stars overhead look like they've been carelessly spilled from a divine paintbrush. No GPS, no radar, no neat little glowing blue dot on your phone. Just you, the swell of the sea, and the thought, how on earth do you not get lost forever? Spoiler alert, you probably wouldn't survive this without serious guidance. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and your local time in the comments. It's always fun to see where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The ocean at night feels different, like it's holding secrets just beneath the surface. You lean over the side of your imaginary canoe, staring into inky depths, and it's like staring into space but wetter and with more suspicious splashing sounds. The Pacific Ocean sprawls across 1/3 of Earth's surface, and for thousands of years, Polynesians somehow navigated its wild enormity. That's a mainstream historical fact right there. Polynesian voyagers crossed distances that dwarfed European explorations long before Columbus decided to blunder westward. Now here's a quirky little tidbit. Some island traditions say that navigators could feel the movement of invisible swells with their skin, like a sixth sense tuned to ocean rhythm. It wasn't magic, it was body training. But honestly, if you're lying here in the dark, doesn't it sound like the ultimate superpower? You're basically Aquaman minus the talking fish entourage. Historians still argue whether Polynesians discovered new islands deliberately, guided by maps and knowledge, or if some voyages were happy accidents where survival instincts turned shipwrecks into colonization. It's a debate that rocks between intent and serendipity. Were they master strategists or just stubborn optimists? Either way, the results are undeniable. Human footprints spread from Samoa to Hawaii to Easter Island, knitting together an oceanic civilization that would leave even modern sailors squinting. The canoe beneath you sways, and your mind tries to mimic how those navigators once thought. No land in sight, yet knowledge resting on stars, waves, and the faint flight of seabirds. Imagine the patience required. Days of rowing with no confirmation that land even exists. It's like following the world's vaguest Google Maps, but without the soothing, recalculating voice when you mess up. The soundscape builds. Slap of paddles, whisper of trade winds, gulls wheeling overhead. Somewhere far in the black water, dolphins break the surface, their sleek bodies shimmering in moonlight. For the Polynesians, those dolphins weren't just cute distractions, they were signs. The sea was a text to be read, and each clue, bird, current, cloud, was a letter. You, lying here now, let that hum settle into your chest. It's not chaotic, it's patterned, like a heartbeat hidden inside endless waves. And if you close your eyes, you might picture that first daring leap of faith. Families loading supplies into narrow canoes, trusting not only themselves but the knowledge whispered by ancestors. The fire pits are cold on shore, the songs fade behind, and ahead, just stars and waves. Still, there's a calmness in imagining it. You've been lulled by engines your whole life, but these voyagers trusted silence. They let the sea sing them across. So here you are, floating on the edge of sleep, tracing the first brushstrokes of a story that belongs more to patience than to conquest. Polynesian navigation isn't about charging forward with flags and cannons. It's about listening. Listening so deeply that even waves become sentences, and the sky becomes a library. And tonight, you're borrowing that library card. The canoe drifts onward. The stars shuffle above. Somewhere in the dark, a stick map waits to be explained. But for now, just let the thought linger. People once crossed the impossible, not with steel, but with memory, rhythm, and faith in the sea. The night stretches on, and you're still adrift. But your mind is steady, softened by the rhythm of paddles that don't even exist. That's the trick of this kind of history. It doesn't barge into your brain like a brass band. It hums, it waits, it lulls. So, Let's talk about one of the most beautifully dull tools ever invented: stick charts. Imagine a map, but instead of paper or pixels, it's made of coconut fibers lashed together with shells tied at certain points. Doesn't sound impressive, right? But those bent little sticks weren't random doodles, they were coded diagrams of wave patterns. Yes, waves. The very thing most of us try to ignore when we're seasick. Mainstream history usually gets excited about compasses, sextants, telescopes, shiny tools of European explorers. But these stick charts? They were the Polynesians' quiet supercomputers. Each bend of fiber represented how swells bounced off islands, how currents shifted, how invisible forces whispered across the sea. You didn't read them like a book. You memorized them until they lived in your head. After that, you could toss the physical chart aside and rely on the one tucked inside your skull. Picture yourself holding one now. It's light, fragile, almost laughable. But to someone trained, it was like unfolding Google Earth in the middle of the Pacific. You sit with it for a moment, the shells clicking softly, like beads on a rosary. Each shell a reminder of a landmass, each line a reminder of paths unseen. Now, you and I both know you're probably lying down right now, your head pressed into a pillow. Imagine balancing that same pillow on open water, night air cool against your skin, waves shifting beneath. That fragile stick chart suddenly feels like the only lifeline between "we're fine" and "we're doomed." Strangely comforting, isn't it? And here's a historical curveball. Westerners stumbled upon these charts centuries later and dismissed them as primitive curiosities. They didn't understand that these weren't maps in the way Europeans thought of maps. They weren't meant to look like islands, they were meant to behave like the sea. It's almost poetic that something so vital could be so easily underestimated. But the Polynesians didn't care if outsiders scoffed. They didn't need validation, they had their islands, their voyages, their traditions. Their knowledge flowed like currents, from teacher to student, father to son, aunt to niece. The classroom wasn't a desk, it was a canoe. The textbook wasn't paper, it was the ocean itself. And now, imagine closing your eyes and feeling what they felt. The sway beneath your hips, the wind brushing your cheeks, the stick chart long memorized, your mind sketching invisible lines as stars will overhead. You're not rushing, you're not checking a clock. You're letting the rhythm of the world itself hold you in place. The longer you picture it, the slower your own thoughts seem to run. Like waves smoothing jagged rocks, your worries get worn down. The Polynesians weren't panicked, they were patient. And that patience is contagious. So here you are, floating deeper into their world. Not conquering it, not romanticizing it, just noticing. The stars are brighter, the sea is louder, and that stick chart, fragile though it may be, is steady in your hands. You're learning, without realizing it, how to be at peace with endlessness. And that, my friend, is the secret behind their voyages. The ocean wasn't an enemy, it was a teacher. The canoe drifts on, steady as your breath, and your mind drifts too, toward the people who carried this knowledge like a birthright. You picture a boy, barefoot, lean, shoulders browned by the sun, sitting cross-legged in the shade of a palm. An elder sits across from him, a weathered hand tracing lines in the sand. No chalkboard, no PowerPoint, just fingers, sand, and the endless sea beyond. You lean closer, eavesdropping. The elder presses a shell into the sand. "Island," he says. Then he drags a line outward, crooked and thin. "Wave." Another shell, another line. A web spreads beneath the boy's gaze, fragile as a spider's, and yet more enduring than ink on parchment. Because once memorized, it lives forever. This wasn't school in the way you and I remember it. No bells, no homework assignments scribbled in red pen. Lessons were delivered in quiet, patient repetitions. The ocean itself was the test. You either remembered or you drifted, sometimes literally, into oblivion. Mainstream history tells us Polynesian children learned by watching, imitating, practicing. That's true. But here's the quirkier side. Some navigators trained by lying flat on their backs in canoes, eyes shut, letting their bodies feel the roll of waves. They called it reading the sea by the skin. Imagine your teacher today telling you, "Homework tonight. Lie very still and let the floor rock you." sounds absurd. It also sounds like the perfect prelude to a nap. Historians still argue whether this kind of learning, muscle memory, intuition, sensation, counts as formal education. Some call it oral tradition, others call it embodied knowledge. Either way, it worked. And as you lie there now, you can almost trick yourself into feeling that roll beneath your ribs, that tug of an invisible current pulling you towards something you can't see but somehow know is there. The teaching wasn't only about maps and waves. It was about humility. A navigator wasn't the master of the sea, he or she was its student. Forgetting that was dangerous. Arrogance could drown you faster than a sudden storm. So lessons came wrapped in parables, stories of voyagers lost because they thought they knew better than the swells. Little bedtime warnings, whispered under starlight, like your parents telling you not to touch the stove. Except the stove was an infinite ocean. Picture the boy again, nodding earnestly, repeating lines, lifting sticks, setting shells. Then picture yourself in his place, staring at the sand until the shapes blur. You're trying to memorize, but your eyelids grow heavier. The tide is creeping up, erasing half the chart before you're ready. The elder only smiles. The sea doesn't care about your schedule. You'll learn or you won't. The waves aren't going anywhere. And here's a fun detail. Not all stick charts looked alike. Some were small and simple, like cheat sheets tucked in a pocket. Others sprawled like tangled dream catchers, so complex they looked impossible to decipher. Each one was as individual as the navigator who built it. If you tried to swap one person's chart for another's, you'd probably fail, like trying to log into someone else's mind. You settle into that thought, the idea of each chart being personal, intimate, private. It makes the knowledge feel alive, like a heartbeat pulsing beneath the fibers. And slowly, your own heartbeat starts to echo it. By now, you've been listening long enough that your body might be mimicking the rhythm. Shoulders sink. Breath slows. The ocean has been teaching you too, without you noticing. That's the beauty of Polynesian learning. It sneaks in sideways, almost by accident. And as you drift further into this night, you find yourself smiling. Not because anything dramatic has happened. There are no shipwrecks here, no thunderous battles. Just people, patient as stars, whispering their secrets across generations. And you, lying there in your modern bed, have joined the circle. You're rocking gently in that canoe again, lulled by the steady rhythm. But this time your gaze lifts higher. Above you stretches the night sky, thousands of stars pricking the velvet blackness. The same stars Polynesian navigators knew so intimately they could call them by name, trace their seasonal paths, and use them like a GPS system long before satellites existed. You tilt your head back, almost craning your neck against your pillow, and let that star field unfold. Imagine being taught to read the heavens the way we might be taught the alphabet. Not a B-C but Sirius, Altair, Pleiades. Your home row wasn't a keyboard. It was a band of constellations arcing from horizon to horizon. Children memorized them by sitting with elders who pointed, night after night, repeating names until they became second nature. You didn't just learn the stars, you lived under them, breathed them in, let them stitch themselves into your sense of direction. The mainstream fact here is this. Polynesian navigators used a mental device called a star compass. Instead of thinking north, south, east, west, they divided the horizon into dozens of points marked by rising and setting stars. If you saw a star emerge from one notch on the horizon, you knew exactly where your canoe pointed. Precise, elegant, no magnetic needles needed. Here's the quirky tidbit, though. Not every navigator agreed on which stars mattered most. Some relied heavily on certain constellations. Others preferred obscure stars no one else noticed. It was a little like arguing over which coffee shop brews the best latte. Same goal, different tastes. Historians still argue whether this diversity made navigation stronger, through redundancy, or riskier, by causing disagreement. You glance back at the sky in your imagination, and the stars seem to spin slowly, like a lazy planetarium show. Maybe you even chuckle. If someone asked you right now to find Orion's belt, you might hesitate, squinting upward, trying not to confuse it with the random sprinkle of city lights on your ceiling. But out there, far away in time, a navigator would have recognized it instantly, like spotting a friend in a crowded street. Think about how soothing it must have been, night after night, tracing the same patterns, whispering their names like lullabies. The Milky Way itself was called a highway, a glittering path across the sky. Some navigators swore they could feel its pull, as if it weren't just light but a physical guide. Try telling your high school science teacher you felt the Milky Way tugging your canoe, and see how far that gets you. Yet for those voyagers, it was as real as the salt on their lips. There's a phrase you can almost hear an elder saying to his apprentice: "Don't trust your eyes alone. Trust the rising stars." It's the kind of advice that doubles as a life lesson, because stars aren't just markers of direction. They're reminders of patience, of cycles, of how the world keeps spinning no matter how lost you feel. Picture yourself lying in that canoe, the sea breathing beneath you, your body sinking with the swell. The stars will overhead, steady, eternal, unmoved by your tiny anxieties. And as you think of them, you start to feel that same steadiness in your chest. Your worries shrink, just little specks compared to the cosmos. And here's where the humor sneaks in. You'd think such cosmic awareness would make you feel heroic, like an explorer with the universe at your fingertips. Instead, it mostly makes you yawn. Your eyelids droop, your body slackens, and you realize being guided by stars is beautiful, but it's also really soporific. You can't rush the heavens, after all. They rise when they rise, they set when they set. Your only job is to wait, watch, and stay awake long enough not to drift past your destination. You, though, you're free to drift as far as you like. So let the sky will on, its constellations steady companions, and let yourself spin with it, slowly, gently, endlessly, until time itself seems to blur. You're still floating there in your imaginary canoe, but your attention dips downward now, from the heavens above to the water below. Beneath your vessel lies a shifting mirror, restless but loyal, always showing clues if you know how to read them. Polynesian navigators didn't just look up. They studied the ocean itself, treating it like a second map layered under the stars. You let your fingers trail in that cool surface, imagining how each ripple might carry meaning. Mainstream fact first. Waves and swells in the Pacific follow consistent patterns across hundreds of miles. The trade winds, the pull of distant storms, even the way islands block the currents. All these create distinctive signatures. Skilled navigators could feel them in their bodies, sensing a change in rhythm that told them land lay just beyond the horizon. It's like being able to detect the difference between jazz and pop just from the drumbeat alone. Quirky tidbit: some navigators swore they could see invisible islands by watching clouds. Certain cloud formations, puffed low and bright, hinted at reefs or lagoons underneath. Picture a sailor elbowing his apprentice. "See that fluffy guy up there? Bet my last coconut there's a sandbar waiting." Historians still argue whether these sightings were reliable science or just a bit of hopeful imagination, but either way, it worked often enough to become lore. You lean back against your pillow and imagine yourself barefoot, crouched at the canoe's edge, staring at the water like it's a book you're trying to skim. You notice how swells overlap, crisscrossing like handwriting lines in a crowded notebook. To the untrained eye, it's chaos. To the navigator, it's poetry. A steady swell from the northeast whispers of one island chain. A faint rebound wave from the southwest suggests another. Your body becomes the compass needle, hips swaying, knees bending, muscles recording the subtle push and pull. Modern asides sneak in here. Think about how proud you feel when you correctly guess a Wi-Fi password, or when you navigate without checking Google Maps for 5 whole minutes. These voyagers, they were memorizing multi-directional swells across an ocean the size of continents. Your phone battery dies and you're lost at the mall. Their torch guttered out and they still found Fiji. Humbling, isn't it? Imagine the sensory detail of it. The groan of the canoes would flexing with the waves, the salt mist coating your lips, the hiss of water against the hull. Now imagine trying to fall asleep while paying that much attention. No wonder these traditions demanded apprentices train for years. Staying awake long enough to track every nuance might have been harder than crossing the ocean itself. You're not training for a voyage. You're training for a good night's sleep. And the more you think about the endless shhhhh of waves, the heavier your eyelids become. One open scholarly debate lingers here. Historians still argue whether navigators relied more on wave patterns or stars when land was farthest away. Some claim the sea was their primary guide. Others insist the sky always trumped it. The truth probably lies in the mix, that perfect balance of above and below, cosmic and earthly, guiding the canoe like a duet. And tucked inside that debate is something almost funny. Imagine two navigators bickering mid-ocean. It's definitely the stars. No, it's the swells. While the apprentice in the back just prays neither of them falls overboard. Arguments that, centuries later, still echo in textbooks. You smile, maybe even smirk, because it's so very human. Getting heated over how to cross thousands of miles without GPS. You can barely get through a family road trip without fighting over playlists. The deeper you sink into this image, the more the ocean swells start to merge with your own breathing. In out, crest, trough. Your chest rises and falls like the canoe itself. You feel the weight of your body rocking gently, lulled by imaginary currents. Your muscles soften. Your mind softens. And soon, even the water seems to whisper. Not every journey is about speed. Some are about drifting, waiting, rocking yourself into calm. So keep floating here with the swells, feeling them cradle you like a vast hammock. Stars above, waves below, and you right in the middle, suspended between two maps, one written in light, the other in water. Both whispering the same thing, rest, rest, rest. Your eyes drift from the rippling water to something stranger, something less about the raw ocean and more about what human hands did with it. Because here comes the real quirk of Polynesian navigation. Those stick charts. Imagine a whole culture inventing IKEA-looking blueprints, except instead of telling you how to assemble a bookshelf, they told you how to survive thousands of miles of open sea. And no Allen wrench required. Mainstream fact first. These stick charts, known as rebelib or madong depending on type, were made by navigators in the Marshall Islands. Thin palm ribs, bent and tied together with fiber, created lattices representing wave patterns, while shells or stones marked islands. They weren't maps in the Western sense, they weren't meant to be carried onto voyages. Instead, they were teaching tools, memorization aids, the ocean rendered into a fragile skeleton of sticks. Picture one propped against a hut wall, catching firelight while an apprentice kneels, tracing lines with a fingertip, repeating the lessons aloud until they settle into memory. Quirky tidbit? Some of these stick charts were so abstract that if you handed one to a modern cartographer, they'd think it was either a toddler's craft project or some avant-garde wall art. And yet, each twist of palm rib held exact meaning. There's even a debate over whether navigators ever took them on board, or if they existed purely as mnemonic devices. Historians still argue whether the charts functioned as literal navigation guides or were more like practice flashcards before the test. Either way, they show just how inventive humans get when confronted with, oh, by the way, your neighborhood is basically infinite saltwater. You lean back into this image, the apprentice by the flickering torch, the elder navigator's voice low, steady, rhythmic like a chant. You can almost hear it. This bend means the wave rebounds here. This line curves because the swell splits there, over and over until the ocean stops being chaos and becomes a patterned fabric. And you, if you close your eyes, start to feel it too. That repeating cadence could be a lullaby if you let it. Here's where your modern brain gets involved. Imagine trying to convince your high school geometry teacher that, yes, your homework is technically a navigational stick chart. Or picture explaining it to your phone-addicted friend. It's like Google Maps, but made of twigs and string. Their face, blank. Your face, smile. Because you know that long before satellites, someone had already figured out how to download the ocean into memory. A sensory detail sneaks in. The smell of palm fiber singed in the fire, the soft scrape of wood against wood, the quiet of a hut at night broken only by the teacher's voice and the rustle of palm leaves outside. The apprentice nods, eyelids heavy, but they dare not doze off. Falling asleep in class here doesn't cost you a grade. It costs you your life at sea. You, however, have permission. In fact, nodding off is the whole point. Now humor me. Imagine those navigators running a kind of proto-PowerPoint. Next slide. The elder says, tapping the chart. No laser pointer, just a knobby finger and maybe a stern look. And somewhere in the back, an apprentice stifles a yawn. Your yawn, mirrored centuries later. There's comfort in that symmetry. One scholarly debate still lingers. Some researchers believe that the charts weren't literal at all, but symbolic, like memory palaces for oral tradition. Meaning the sticks weren't showing exact distances or bearings, just cues for remembering what the navigator already knew in their bones. You picture two anthropologists arguing over it in a conference room, PowerPoint against PowerPoint, while a Polynesian ancestor might just shrug and say, "Does it matter? We got where we were going." That shrug is your exit ramp tonight, because you don't need the whole chart laid out before you. You need the rhythm of learning, the soft creak of palm ribs, the patient repetition of lessons spoken in the dark. Your mind can treat that stick chart like a hammock, 2 lines of wood stretching, bending, curving, until you're rocked back and forth, swayed by ancient geometry disguised as bedtime comfort. And here's your joke for the road. Next time someone brags about being a visual learner, just picture a Marshallese apprentice smirking, holding up their stick chart like, "Yeah, we've been doing that since forever." You can almost hear them laugh across the centuries, and it's surprisingly soothing. So let yourself sink into that woven lattice. Feel its pattern surround you like a net, not one that traps, but one that supports. The sticks overlap, the shells glint like stars, the whole structure fragile but reliable. Just like you tonight, soft, delicate, but capable of holding steady until morning. You're drifting with that stick chart still glowing in your mind when another layer folds in. The training wasn't just about memorizing wooden lattices, it was about bodies learning the ocean like a second skin. Polynesian navigators didn't just look at charts. They lay in the bottom of their canoes, eyes closed, letting the rhythm of waves drum through their bones. Try explaining that as a teaching method in a modern classroom. Today, kids, please lie on the floor and pretend you're a canoe. Yeah, the substitute teacher gets fired immediately. Mainstream fact first. Navigators used a technique called wave piloting. They'd sense the subtle differences between swells, primary swells from prevailing winds, secondary ones rebounding off distant islands, even tertiary ripples layered like background noise. By lying still, feeling those motions against their hips and shoulders, they could identify when land was over the horizon. It's like using your own body as a compass. Weird flex, but an incredibly successful one. Quirky tidbit? Some accounts say that navigators trained by sitting blindfolded in pools or lagoons, with elders rocking small boats around them to mimic swells. It sounds like a mix of meditation and a carnival ride. And here's the kicker. The students weren't allowed to peek. If they opened their eyes, the elders scolded them, insisting that sight was a distraction. It makes you wonder how many apprentices accidentally drifted into nap time during class. Maybe that's the secret connection to you right now. Lying there, feeling the world rock you, except your ocean is just the mattress springs and maybe the hum of a fan. Historians still argue whether this skill was purely sensory or partly psychological. Some suggest that it required years of training to tune in to patterns most people can't feel. Others argue that anyone, given practice, could learn to sense swells. It's just that we've forgotten how because we live in houses instead of canoes. The debate gets almost philosophical. Are navigators superhuman, or are the rest of us just undertrained? You lie there, smug in your undertraining, happy to let someone else paddle. Let's bring it alive. Imagine the night sky wide above, stars endless, but you keep your eyes closed because that's the point. You're on a canoe so long and narrow that every ripple matters. The hull creaks softly. The navigator lies flat, listening not with ears but with skin. Each swell says something. I bounced off that reef. I was split by that island. I'm strong because the wind has blown steady for days. And somehow, the navigator translates all that invisible chatter into direction. If you try hard enough, maybe you can too, though in your case it probably just means rolling over into a more comfortable pillow dent. The sensory richness makes it vivid. The salt air in your nostrils, damp wood against your palms, hair sticking from sea spray, the creak of lashings, the faint gurgle where water laps the hull. Somewhere overhead, a bird cries, but you don't open your eyes. You don't need to. You're becoming one with the water's rhythm, even if your rhythm is the slowing thud of your own heartbeat. Here's the joke for the stretch. If you're ever accused of being too lazy to move, just say you're training in wave piloting. That way, lying flat with your eyes closed suddenly becomes advanced navigational practice. A lazy Sunday? No, my friend, it's survival training ancient edition. And maybe you wonder about the trust it required. Entire crews depending on one person lying still, eyes shut, claiming they know where land is. Imagine being the skeptical cousin in the back of the canoe. So, wait, you're telling me you feel a different wobble and that means there's an island over there? Really? But the navigator shrugs, points, and a day later, bam, land. That's either wizardry or mastery. Maybe both. There's comfort in that trust, though. You picture yourself letting go, relying on another's practiced senses, knowing they can feel what you cannot. And as you relax into your own bed ocean, you realize that's kind of what you're doing now. Letting the story steer, letting the hum of imagined waves guide you toward the edge of sleep. One scholarly debate sneaks in again. Some researchers argue that wave piloting wasn't separate from star navigation, but complementary, like two hands of the same body. When skies clouded over, the waves filled in. When the ocean grew too noisy, the stars stepped up. So maybe the real trick wasn't one method or the other but the balance between them. The yin-yang of guidance. Sky and sea, seen and felt, eyes and skin. You roll that thought around like a shell in your palm until it smooths your mind. And so the canoe drifts, the navigator reclines, the crew rests, and the ocean whispers under all of it. The sensation is simple but infinite. Back and forth, rise and fall, just like breath. You let your own chest rise, fall, slower now, gentler, until even you might pass for a navigator, rocking steady in the quiet dark. The stick chart now sits before you like a cryptic crossword puzzle carved in wood. The lines are bent and tied, some long, some short, some angled in ways that at first seem random, but after a while start to whisper their secrets. You picture a navigator crouched low, running a finger along a curve, then pausing at the junction where it meets another stick, nodding silently. You realize you are watching someone read the ocean like you would a street map, only this map doesn't mark roads. It marks the moods of the sea. And unlike your trusty GPS, there's no polite robotic voice reminding you to make a U-turn. Miss a swell here and you might just never come back. Comforting thought, right? Don't worry, you probably wouldn't survive this anyway. The curved sticks represent the dominant swells rolling across the Pacific. Some charts are a web of arching lines, each one showing how waves bend around islands. Others are simpler, with straight sticks stretching like highways, indicating a reliable swell direction that can guide you for hundreds of miles. Tiny shells or knots mark islands, not to scale, of course, but as reference points, anchors of memory. You think of it as the minimalistic IKEA version of a world atlas. Sleek, stripped down, and guaranteed to frustrate anyone who insists on precise measurements. The interesting thing is, these charts weren't for constant consultation during a voyage. A navigator didn't unroll his carry-on chart mid-ocean like a tourist fumbling for a subway map. No, these were teaching tools, memorization aids. Before the voyage, a master navigator would sit with an apprentice, and together they'd trace the paths of waves, recite where the swells would change, and mark which star would rise at each waypoint. By the time the canoe shoved off the beach, the chart stayed home. You carried the map not in your hand but in your skull. Historians still argue whether some navigators ever brought pocket-sized versions on board, but the consensus leans toward memory being the true compass. It wasn't just what was on the chart, it was what it symbolized. You realized the sticks weren't meant to be perfect representations. They were mnemonic devices, little cues to unlock a vast oral library of knowledge. A single curved stick might stand for the way waves bend near an island, but in the navigator's mind, it unfurled into a detailed image of currents, dangers, fishing grounds, and even which ancestors once sailed those waters. You see now why they said navigation was an art as much as a science. One quirky tidbit. Some of these charts were kept secret, guarded almost jealously within families. Not everyone was entitled to see the full puzzle. If you think about it, that makes sense. Your ability to find land in the middle of endless blue was the ultimate superpower. Why hand over your recipe for survival to just anyone? That'd be like giving away your Netflix password in the middle of a zombie apocalypse. As your eyelids feel heavier, you imagine yourself sitting beside a master chart maker. He pushes a piece of palm rib into your hands, shows you how to bend it until it curves just so, then lashes it in place with a thin strip of fiber. You tie the knot clumsily. It slips. He smirks, redoes it in a blink, and nods for you to try again. Hours pass, the rhythmic tug of the twine matching the sound of distant waves, until the board is filled with arcs and crosses. When you squint, it looks messy. When he squints, it's the Pacific laid bare. And you remember, back when you laughed about crocodile dung sunscreen and canoe karaoke, how absurd yet practical all these details seemed. The charts are another reminder. Nothing in this world is purely symbolic when survival depends on it. A stick tied the wrong way could mean misremembering a swell pattern. Misremember a swell and you drift. Drift too far and, well, we don't have to finish that bedtime thought, do we? Still, the thought is oddly soothing, in that humbling way that makes your daily stresses shrink. Tomorrow's emails don't seem so deadly when you realize people once crossed oceans armed with nothing more than twigs, memory, and stubborn faith in the sea. You let yourself float with that image a little longer, hearing the imagined creak of the canoe, feeling the phantom sway, and trusting, just for a moment, that the invisible sticks in your head could keep you safe. You picture the canoe sliding into the deep blue, charts left on the shore, the navigator standing with bare feet braced against the deck. There is no compass needle, no sextant gleaming in the sun. Instead, he lifts his chin and scans the horizon, then closes his eyes, feeling for the gentle rhythm beneath the hull. You try it too, imagining yourself swaying in time with swells that arrive from two directions at once. The canoe rocks, tips slightly, then steadies. You realize he is reading an invisible crossing of waves, like someone recognizing two songs playing at the same time and still picking out the melody. And you're still trying to figure out which way is forward. This is where stick charts come alive, not as wooden puzzles but as living rhythms encoded in muscle memory. A navigator doesn't just see, he feels. The rocking, the slap of waves against the side, the way spray arcs into the wind. All these are signals. Historians still argue whether the navigators could actually sense subtle wave patterns through their own bodies, or if this is more of a romantic exaggeration passed down through oral tradition. Either way, when you're in the middle of the Pacific with no land in sight, believing in your own sea-tingling superpower is probably a good motivational tactic. At night, the ocean becomes a dome of stars. The navigator points to one, steady and bright, rising in a fixed place on the horizon. You hear him murmur its name, then another, then another. These stars are checkpoints, glowing signposts of a cosmic highway. You realize each one is tied to a story, a chant, a memory, because if you can't Google directions, you'd better set them to music. That's how knowledge survives. As songs pass down from mouth to ear, so familiar that forgetting them is almost impossible. And here's the quirky part. Some navigators were known to deliberately sleep in awkward positions, training their bodies to wake when a certain star appeared in the window of their hut. Talk about a celestial alarm clock. Forget snooze buttons. If you miss your cue, you wake up lost. Try explaining that excuse to your crewmates. You lean into the moment, imagining yourself trying to join this tradition. You squint at the sky, but the stars blur together, a billion glittering dots that look more like spilled sugar than a road map. Your navigator guide shakes his head gently. He tells you it isn't about memorizing them all. It's about noticing the way they rise and fall, the rhythm of their movement. You feel the ocean roll under you, the air warm and damp, and you catch just the faintest suggestion of order in the chaos. Still, the sea is fickle. Clouds drift in, blotting out the stars. Rain hisses down, flattening the swells into confused ripples. You shiver, realizing how fragile this system is. Yet the navigator doesn't panic. He waits. He listens. He feels for the swell that never disappears, the deep rolling heartbeat of the ocean that ignores surface fuss. He nods once, points, and the canoe glides on. You're equal parts impressed and horrified, like watching someone juggle knives blindfolded, except you're in the juggling act too. One historical fact that stands steady. These voyages were real, and vast distances were covered long before Europeans ever showed up with their iron compasses and sketchy maps. Polynesian canoes reached Hawaii, New Zealand, and Easter Island, places separated by thousands of miles of open water. That's like you paddling across the Atlantic with nothing but a stick chart crammed in your head and a vague sense of, yep, I think it's this way. And somehow they didn't just survive, they thrived. You recall the stick chart you studied on shore, the tangle of curves and shells. Out here it isn't static, it's alive. The curved stick becomes the feel of waves curling around the canoe. The little shell becomes the glimpse of a cloud piling up over unseen land. The whole messy board hums in your chest. You start to appreciate that the map was never meant to sit lifeless on a wall. It was a rehearsal for this performance, a way to train your senses so that now, in the middle of nowhere, you don't panic. You simply know. The night stretches, soft, endless. You let your eyes close for a moment, not quite asleep, not quite awake, trusting that the canoe will continue to cut through the swells. The thought is both terrifying and oddly peaceful. For once, surrendering control feels right, because someone else is tuned to the sea in ways you can't imagine. And maybe that's the greatest lesson. You don't always have to master the waves. Sometimes you just need to feel them. You wake with the faint light of dawn staining the horizon. The sea is calmer now, as if it too has drifted into a lighter sleep, the swells smoothing into long, rolling breaths. You rub your eyes and notice the navigator still crouched at the bow, steady as a statue. He hasn't checked a phone, a clock, or even his own reflection. Yet he knows exactly where you are. You want to ask how, but you don't. It would be like interrupting someone mid-prayer. As the sun climbs, the air grows warmer, and the smell of salt mingles with the faint tang of seaweed. The canoe's prow cuts a narrow line, and you start to see small hints that land might be near. A lone bird wheels overhead. A cluster of drifting branches bobs on the surface. These aren't accidents, they're signals. Navigators knew which birds only flew a few miles from shore, which fish hinted at shallow reefs, which clouds thickened above unseen islands. The ocean itself becomes a rumor, whispering land before land appears. Historians still argue whether every Polynesian voyage was carefully planned or if some were accidents followed by lucky survival. But when you see the evidence, the repetition of patterns, the skill passed down through generations, you can't help but lean toward respect. It takes too much precision to be mere accident. You imagine yourself steering blind across hundreds of miles of open sea, hoping to bump into an island. Your chances? Slimmer than your phone surviving a fall into the toilet. And then, after days of endless water, there it is, the faint green blur of an island rising from the horizon. Your pulse quickens. The navigator doesn't react with shock or surprise. He nods as if the world has simply unfolded exactly as expected. He knew it was here long before you saw it. You realize then that the stick chart, the star paths, the feel of the waves, they weren't just tools. They were confidence, wrapped in wood and memory. The canoe slides closer. Palms sway in the wind, their fronds flashing in the sunlight like flags of welcome. You picture stepping ashore, your feet pressing into sand that feels both foreign and inevitable. You've crossed an impossible distance without modern instruments, yet somehow you've arrived. And here's the quirky tidbit. Some oral traditions say navigators kept their charts hidden, guarded almost like family secrets. Outsiders couldn't simply copy the design, because without the training, the chart looked like nonsense anyway. It was less a map and more a private diary, the kind of thing that only made sense to those who had lived it. You grin at the thought of some poor visitor scratching their head over a map that looks like a birdcage collapsed under its own weight. The canoe beaches softly, the keel sliding into wet sand. You take a breath, realizing that you've been part of something remarkable. And even though your modern self would never risk the journey without GPS, you can't deny a quiet admiration for those who did. They made the ocean a highway, not a barrier. They took what looked like emptiness and turned it into a web of connections. And now, as the island sounds drift into your ears, birds calling, waves hissing against coral, palm leaves rattling. You feel your own eyes growing heavy again. Maybe it's the relief of arriving. Maybe it's the gentle rocking that still lingers in your body. Or maybe it's the fact that history, even boring history, has a way of softening into something dreamlike when you let it. So you let yourself sink into that drowsy rhythm, carried by the echo of waves and the faint memory of stars. The ocean fades now, stretching out behind you as a memory rather than a place. The canoe, the charts, the chants, they all dissolve into a soft hum, like the distant roll of surf heard through an open window. You don't need to hold on to them tightly. Let them slip away, like driftwood carried off by a gentle tide. Your breathing slows, steady and even, the same rhythm you felt beneath the hull. The swells rise and fall, and you find your own chest mirroring that calm expansion. Each inhale brings the cool, salty breeze of the Pacific. Each exhale lets go of tension you didn't even notice you were carrying. Imagine the stars overhead fading into daylight, their paths no longer urgent. The navigator lowers his hand, satisfied, and you no longer need to strain to follow his gaze. The sky softens, the sea quiets, and your body loosens into stillness. You are safe now, the journey complete. There is nothing more to do, nowhere else you need to be. You've crossed vast oceans without lifting a finger, and now the only task left is rest. Let your mind blur, the edges softening, like clouds drifting across a morning horizon. Let the last details of history, sticks, shells, waves, and stars, scatter into gentle fragments. They can wait for another night. For now, there is only the hush of the ocean and the quiet of your own heartbeat, steady and slow. The story is over, but the calm remains. And as you finally give in to sleep, remember, sometimes the most powerful maps aren't the ones that lead you across the sea, but the ones that guide you into dreams.